Hi, so I'm Kashaf Salaheen. I'm currently in my third year at the University of Toronto. I'm in a computer science specialist with a psychology minor. Last summer, I interned at Edsembli as a software developer. And currently in school, I'm very active. I'm the president of two clubs, Women in Computer Science as well as Scientista. So last summer, I worked at Edsembli Inc. So this is a company that makes software for school boards, and it helps to just make it easier for school boards to organize their information. My role throughout the entire summer was to help make an employee payroll API. So this was to help employers, which were the school boards, basically get employee payrolls more efficiently. So that's what I worked on all summer by myself because I was the only software developer intern at that company. However, I had a lot of supervisors and I went to them whenever I needed help. With this role, it was a web application, so I used ASP.NET Core, C#, Visual Studio, Postman, and Swagger. So all of these technologies were really new to me. I've never heard of them or never used them before, so I thought it was really interesting to learn a lot of new things over the course of just 4 months. So a typical day at the work was getting to work at around 8:30. So I would get a cup of coffee and just hang around for a bit, talk to the other interns who were in marketing or QA, and we just discuss kind of what's going on around the office. Then we'd get to work, and the people around me all also worked on the same web application, but we were all working on different APIs. So in the morning, what we would usually do is kind of talk to each other and see what each other was working on. And what we would do is, if anyone had questions for one another, because a lot of us were more experienced than others, we would ask each other and then people would help us. So that's kind of what the morning was reserved for, just asking like lingering questions from the past day. And then what we would do is we would work on our own application. And as I had questions, I would go to my supervisor because a lot of the times since I was working on something new, I didn't know how to work the applications, so he would come and help me. On top of that, there was someone who was responsible for employee payroll, so I had to go to him and ask how a payroll would look and kind of understand what a payroll, what the school boards wanted the payroll API to actually be doing. So at this point, it was more talking to the people who had to interact with clients and understand the client needs in order to create the API the most appropriately. So that would happen throughout the day. And near the end of the day, I would usually meet with my supervisor, talk about what I did that day, and just make sure that I wasn't like falling behind everyone else and making sure that it was actually working. He would also often tell me like how to test cases and make sure things were working. And sometimes, occasionally, I would talk to the boss about how things were going, but that was usually every 2 weeks, not every day because he was a lot busier. So the hiring process was really interesting for me. This was my first software developer internship. So obviously when I was applying at the very beginning, it was kind of applying into a black hole. I was setting applications, but I wasn't getting anything back, not even rejections most of the time. If companies didn't like you, they just like wouldn't send you anything. So near the end of like my job search, I decided to reach out to connections because I thought that was the best way in order to actually get a job as opposed to just like mass applying. Especially for your first job, I do recommend a lot of people like take advantage of the connections that you have because there's no reason not to. And it obviously like your first internship, it's very hard to get if you were just trying to mass apply to a bunch of companies. So I did get this through a connection. He introduced me to the boss, and that was basically what the connection did, but I still had to go through the standard hiring process in which I did have interviews and talk to the supervisor and the boss to make sure that I was a good fit. So overall, like that's how the summer internship process went. But for summer internships, you should start looking approximately like a year in advance. So if you're looking for like to start in the summer of 2020, you start looking in September 2019 for internships then. And I also do recommend talking to your connections because that's so important, especially for your very first internship. I think my biggest challenge with work was working with a lot of technologies that I haven't really used before. As I mentioned, I worked with ASP.NET, C Sharp, Visual Studio, and all of this was centered around web development. And I've never really worked with web development before. In school, I think we're taught to kind of code functions that are kind of isolated from everything else, and they don't really seem to me to have like we just code these functions and they don't seem to have any practical use. But when I was working at work, it was so interesting to see that the work that I was doing was affecting clients on a day-to-day basis. Like, people were using the things that I was making. And because of that, I had to test more thoroughly, and I was more willing to test because I knew that people were actually going to be using the products that I was making. And also, I think the interesting thing about work is that you're very independent, and as university is independent as well, but it was up to me how quickly I wanted to finish the assignment. They were like, take your time, just make sure it's done and it's done well. However, it's kind of up to me to decide how quickly I want to go, how much testing I want to do. And I also think it's important that to go to your supervisor pretty regularly. And I would go to him, and at the beginning I didn't go to him enough, and I started to realize that I would struggle because I wasn't really sure of certain things that were happening. So throughout the summer I started going to him more and more often. And I think that really helps because as long as you're talking to a supervisor and you're aware of what work you need to do and how it needs to be done, if it's challenging, it's important to know that you can always talk to someone. Otherwise, you're just going to be alone the entire time. So I think that was my biggest challenge, just like deciding how often I wanted to go to my supervisor, and also working with all these new technologies I've never had before. So I think that what really helped me in this position was a lot of the work that I do in school in regards to extracurriculars. So the extracurriculars I did before that internship were I was the director of events for Scientista. I was part of Blue Crew, which is a volunteering program at the University of Toronto, and I was a writer for her campus, so I wrote there for 2 years, and I did a couple of other things as well. So with all of these extracurricular activities, although they may seem like they are different from what I was doing at work, because none of them were really coding or anything, I think the importance is learning how to deal with different types of people. Because with each of these clubs, I was working with such different people because I was in such different clubs. And because of that, I learned how to interact with certain kinds of people. And that helps a lot when you're in a group environment and working at work, so that you know like how to work with people, you know kind of the personalities of others. And I think that helps a lot, like being comfortable with interaction. On top of that, I'm just overall like a pretty outgoing, energetic person. So I think that skill really helps me because I am willing to talk to people, willing to make friends, because I think work and university in general are what you make out of it. And if you decide to just study the entire time, not do anything, that's what you'll get out of it. But I've chosen to do a lot of clubs, try to get a lot of experience. And I think that if you are willing to like take risks and take on those opportunities, those skills will definitely help you succeed. I think a pro for working in Canada is that there is a lot of diversity. I personally really value getting a diverse outlook on different things and getting a variety of opinions on ideas. And at my workplace, there was just so many types of people from all around the world. And I got to talk to a lot of them, and I would talk to them about their careers, their life experience. Most of them which didn't start in Canada, a lot of them started from other countries. So it was just interesting to hear about their career paths and how it ended up into this company. So I thought that was a really good pro of working in Canada. Also, just in Canada, everyone's very nice and welcoming. At my workplace, everyone was really nice and open to questions. No one was ever rude about anything, and I think that's like really nice and very Canadian of us. The only drawback I can think of to working in Canada is that it's not an established technology hub like Silicon Valley. Although Toronto is very established, it doesn't carry the same like kind of establishment that Silicon Valley has with all of these big tech companies. But with that being said, a lot of their offices are in Toronto, and you can still work at those big companies, just not in America. And but I also think that it's very important, like not just to stay in like if you decide to stay in Canada your entire life, that's okay. But also, like, if you go to different places, you might be able to get a more diverse perspective and learn new things from around the world. I think the most important thing that I learned from this experience is that I actually do like coding and I do like software development, because at school you have these assignments and you have deadlines and you have tests all the time. And I don't think I really took the time to understand, like, do I like doing what I'm doing, or am I doing it to like just finish the assignment, get the grades, and just leave? But at work, I realized that I would like to do this as a career. And I think that's why it's so important to take internships throughout your university career, so that you actually get exposed to that field and you realize, oh, like, I would like to be a software developer. And if you choose, like, I don't want to be a software developer, for example, then there are different like job paths you can take with a CS degree, but you should decide that as you are like going through your university career and decide, well, wow, I hated that software development job. Maybe I should go into project management. Maybe I should do become a solutions architect. Like, there are various different various things you can do within the field. And I think that experience in the field, even just for 4 months, lets you decide if you would actually want to do that as a career. So, in regards to my career goals, I would ultimately like to start my own company, preferably to help those with learning disabilities. That's something that I've thought about since high school, and I've always wanted to make applications or anything that could help them. I think that since technology can literally do anything and we have the ability to do anything with it, it's important to kind of do things that are positive for society, with the skills that I have gotten through university. However, before doing that, I would like to gain some experience within the software development field. I would particularly, because I want to start my own company, like to work at a few startups, kind of understand that culture, understand how that startup came to be, just to understand how my own company would look eventually. And that's basically my career goals for the next 10 years. I think the difference is that at school, especially in high school, you are kind of, you like, teachers will watch over you. They'll make sure that you are doing things appropriately. They'll make sure that you're getting tasks done. And if you're not, then they'll come and talk to you. But in the workplace, like, that doesn't happen. I could go to without talking to my supervisor for 2 weeks, and he would just think that I'm just working really hard, and he wouldn't assume that anything's wrong. So it's kind of up to you to decide, like, is this not working, and is it my turn to, like, is it time for me to go and ask him, like, why this isn't working and what I should be doing? And I think that at school you don't really get that, especially in high school, because people are looking after you all the time. University is a little bit different because you don't have that. But with that being said, like, if you decide not to do assignments and stuff, it's only on you. But when you work at a company, like, if you decide not to do this entire API, it harms the entire company and a lot of other workers, because a lot of people might be working on that one thing at once. So I think it's just a very different environment to get used to. I thought it was a much more interesting environment because it's so independent and you get to decide what you want to do, at most days. So I think that's really interesting. And overall, just, I think, like, the amount of independence you get at work, you have to use it really appropriately. I think the advice I would have for high school students is to try out things that you might not have tried out before. I never thought I was going to do a psychology minor. I went into the University of Toronto thinking I was going to do an economics minor. But after doing my first psych course, I absolutely loved it. And it was kind of just me trying to take a bird course, and I thought it would be fun. But I thought it was one of the most interesting courses I've ever taken, and that's why I decided to do a psychology minor. So I think it's very important to try those things that you might not have thought were for you, and because they might be really interesting to you, you might have a lot of fun with it. I also think it's very important to join a lot of clubs. Firstly, because you get to meet a lot of new people, and I think it's always important to gain new perspectives from different people and just get to understand them better. But also, I think you gain a lot of different skills from different clubs. For example, with her campus, I used to write every month for them, and it helped. As a computer science student, I don't really write essays or do anything like that, but it helped keep my writing skills up, and it helped me still be a good communicator and a good writer. So I think it's really important that, especially the clubs you do, don't necessarily have to do with your field, because you don't have to be coding 24/7 just because you're in computer science. You can have other interests, so be sure to branch out and basically just try new things.